Right. So if we can go ahead and get back to our seats, we can get started with the next portion of the conference. I know Jamie's session definitely added a lot of energy to the room, which was the intent. And as we said at the end, right before we closed out there, the consequences are great. That said, there were also questions about what we can do and how that perhaps differs, even some of the questions in the back about their specific roles. And that's really where we're centered on now. So this is more of our speaker series. It's a 3-part series. We close out with a panel. And we've aligned or asked 3 really great leaders to come speak with us this morning, and we're going to kick that session off now. And to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Jesse Wolfersberger of Maritz. Jesse's the Chief Data Officer. One thing I'd like for you to elaborate on, there's some notes here about in your spare time working with a Major League Baseball team. Perhaps you can elaborate on that. When you're up here, it's very interesting. I just don't want to... They did not win the World Series, okay. Yeah. And one of the other things I wanted to note about Jesse is he's actually a board member. So Maritz and Jesse in particular have been with the Center for Analytics and Business Insights since its inception. And we're really excited to have Jesse here. He speaks all over the country, really an amazing thought leader who backs it with some really great content. So please help me in welcoming Jesse to the stage.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Get my clicker going here. Hi. How's everybody going? Good. That is going to be a very tough act to follow. Especially, it's like, well, Jesse will solve this. So trust me, I cannot solve everything there. A little bit about Maritz, just because I think it'll help contextualize what I'm going to talk about here. So Maritz is a 125-year-old company here in St. Louis, and we do motivation. So we do things like loyalty programs and sales incentive programs and employee engagement programs. We really want people to be their best selves. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today has to do with that, because in these different contexts, those things mean different, have different definitions. Just on the baseball front real quick, yes, I do a little bit of baseball analytics on the side. Like I said, the team I particularly work for did not make the playoffs, so we're not going to spend too much time on it, but that is a little bit about my background, which is fun. So I want to start here. You've probably seen this before, and if you haven't, I highly recommend looking it up. Thinking Fast and Slow is just it's my Bible. It's just a great, great book. So our brains work on 2 different systems. We have a fast system and a slow system. So the fast system is all about making quick decisions. It's got a lot of bias sometimes, but it's really where most of our decisions get made. System 2 is the analytical math genius that it's doing all the analytical stuff. It takes more energy. We don't like using it. This is System 1's lazy. System 2 is very power intensive. So, for example, when the question was asked earlier about, well, I know what I should eat for dinner, but what I'm actually going to eat is this. This is System 1 and System 2 just at work and conflict with each other. When I go up to the buffet, it's like, oh, System 1's like donut, sweet, and System 2 is like, your waistline could use some granola, right? So this System 1, System 2. So I bring this up because this is really a key factor into the ethics and the transparency and targeting, all these things we're talking about with digital media and all the different ways that technology is influencing our lives. Because System 1 does creepiness, okay? So I'm going to give you an example. Which would you rather have, 5 ounces of chocolate or 12 ounces of chocolate? Yeah, System 2. No question. More chocolate is better than less chocolate, okay? Right? Now you sure? No, again, maybe you can rationalize and say, yeah, okay, I could cut it up and maybe I would, be okay with it. But your System 1 immediately recognizes that I would rather have that than that. So this is something that is unconscious, okay? So when we look at something like this, for example, so this, I don't know, this is from Rogue One, right? When you see the, likeness of a young Carrie Fisher created by a computer, immediately System 1 says something's off here. I can't even pinpoint what it is, but something's off, right? Another example, so the deep fakes, right, are very hot topic right now, where you're putting, for example, Steve Buscemi's face on Jennifer Lawrence's body. It doesn't, your brain doesn't need to think about something is not right here. This is creepy, right? So creepiness is a system 1 process. In ad targeting, it looks a little bit something like this. So for folks maybe in the back can't read it, you've got Waldo here, and he says, how do the same creepy retargeting ads always seem to find me wherever I am, right? So, you read stories like this. This is a famous digital media story about Target, right? And Target targeting a young woman with pregnancy-related ads because it knew that she was pregnant before her family even did, right? And so this is clearly system 1 creepy. I do not need to think about this. I know that this is wrong, okay? So the problem is that these are complex issues. So this Target story of targeting someone with a pregnancy ad, that's really kind of the same algorithm as this. So we've all seen this before, right? You go into Amazon, and people who bought this frequently bought that. These are the same thing, okay? People who bought formula usually bought diapers. So that's targeting a pregnancy ad, but it's different in this context than this, because in this, our brains are in buying mode, right? So even if this were diapers, this would be less creepy than what we talked about with Target, because you're on Amazon, you are buying something, and it says, oh, people who buy this often buy that. Versus, I'm going to send something to your house that you did not consent to, and it may or may not have something about your buying behavior attached to it, and especially if that's something as sensitive as teen pregnancy, right? There's no question that these two things are the same, and again, the algorithm is kind of the same between these two things. The difference of what makes that not okay and this okay is the context of when it's presented and how it's presented and what the user has consented to. Make sense? Okay. Let me give you some more examples here to kind of prove my thesis here that really it's not about the algorithm, it's about the context. So on a website, it might say this: what's your weight? Right? That's kind of pretty sensitive question. This is actually on the Stitch Fix website. So Stitch Fix, right? They send you clothes. What's your weight? Pretty critical question to getting clothes that fit, right? What if this were on Facebook? Right? System 1, I heard some laughs, right? This was not a, let me think about it for a second and let you know if that's funny or not. No, System 1 knows that this is not okay, right? But you have to have this kind of thing for that. So it's not the question that's the problem, it's the context, okay? Here's another one. Google Maps would like to use your current location. Well, that seems pretty critical. For a map app to use my location, yeah, seems pretty critical. Amazon would like to access the camera. Wait a second. Why does Amazon? Now again, actually on the Amazon app, you can use your camera to like search for things and show pictures and stuff. So it's not that this is completely irrelevant, but yet that system 1 of wait a second, what the? That's this, right? So context matters. Exhibit C. So, and this is one that is near and dear to our business. So let's say you've got a person. And let's say you've got an algorithm. So someone on my data science team has created an algorithm, and it says churn probability, 84%. So we've scored this person in this database, churn probability, 84%. If this is a credit card loyalty program, which we do a lot of, okay, yeah, this person's 84% likely to churn. So maybe we need to give them an offer to get them back, or we need to give them some messaging to get them back, something like that. This is different if this is an employee program, which we also run. And it's like, well, do you want your boss to know your churn probability? Right? Context matters. So in consumer world, it's okay to do stuff like that. It's okay to have churn probability because again, they are consenting to this where you're talking about someone's livelihood. The worst thing that can happen, right, is I don't buy your credit card or I switch to a different card. The worst thing that can happen here is like you lose your job, you lose your livelihood. So we have to be very careful. Even though, again, just like the Amazon recommendation system versus the Target recommendation system, the model is the same. It's not the model, it's the context. So with that, I want to give some guardrails. So these are some guardrails that we've put in my team to try to understand this and have some kind of system. What I will say, just right out of the gate, is I don't have all the answers. We are all trying to figure this out on the fly. There is not, and trust me, I've looked, there is not a book you can buy. There's not an online, here are the rules type of thing, because every situation is different. So what I can give you is guardrails, but also remember that guardrails are not barriers. People can go over guardrails all the time, right? So I want to just share our thinking in this, but I just want to contextualize it a little bit and say, again, it's going to be different for every business. So definitely take a look at yourself. Okay. Guardrail number 1. Legality is not a high enough bar. Okay. So some people will take a look at, okay, well, things like targeting and tracking, and you just kind of go, well, is this legal or not? That is not a high enough bar. Okay. So here's an example. I'll give you a second to read it. Right? So now again, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter that Amazon promotes another toilet seat to you. This is not life or death. This is certainly not all the things that we just talked about with Jamie earlier, right? But just in a business context, this is bad business, right? You're recommending something to someone that doesn't need a second one of that thing, okay? So is this legal? Sure, but I want to think about, well, what is legal is here, what makes money and what is business relevance here, and then maybe ethics and values are even on top of that. But don't just worry about what's legal. Okay. Well, let me make sure I clarify. Worry about what's legal, but that is not enough. Okay. Number 2, people appreciate transparency. So this is a study that we did about a year ago. So we have on our rewards site, so if you have a credit card rewards program and you're earning points and you go to spend those points, you would go to our website. And so we had three different options here. So some of the audience got recommended items, the same way that we talked about on Amazon. Hey, this is recommended, okay? The second group got the same items recommended to them, but they had additional messaging which says recommended based on your clicks, okay? The third one got, again, same items, recommended based on what you've shared with us, okay? So the same items, just different messaging, and we found that folks who got this message were 38% more likely to click, and folks who got this one were 50% more likely. So again, I wouldn't draw terribly big conclusions around the difference between these two. I just think it's definitely the case that both of these outperform the first, right? So sharing some transparency of why I got this is pretty important, and I think, again, a good guardrail for your business. Okay, avoid sensitive inputs into your AI model. So when we do a targeting, so for example, on a credit card program, we've got access to a whole lot of data. We know where that person who has a credit card, we know every place they swipe that card. So there's a lot of variables that you might use for a model. If I was trying to predict churn, again, for a credit card customer, there's a lot of variables that might work, but we just don't want to target against that, okay? So it looks something like this. I mean, every X variable, so number 1, every X variable you really need to take a look at. So don't just say, all right, give me all variables that fall into this bucket. You really need to look at every single one and make sure that that's something you want to use. Remove any variables that could be proxies for protected groups, okay? So again, I wish I had, and here's the full list. There is no full list. Here are some you might think about, okay? Spend on medical expenses, government income, high interest loans, nursing homes and assisted living. So if folks are spending in these categories or depending on your business, if you see income from these could be, right, direct proxies for a protected group. So let's not target against those, and there's probably a list of thousands more. But like I said, there's no template to follow, so you have to use your judgment, okay? If in doubt, remove it. Trust your system one. When you're going through this list with your team and you go, nursing homes, like there should be a system one kind of jolt to your system that says, ooh, I don't want to target against that, okay? And my final point for this is if the success of your model depends on one of these, it's trash anyway, right? So like you're telling me that your model would only work if it had this in it, and without it, it's not gonna work, then your model's not very good. So target against the things that are true for everybody, or again, spend on Starbucks, right? So in a credit card loyalty example, like I was talking about, if we used how much someone spends on Starbucks, that's pretty okay. Like everyone spends on Starbucks. Now again, there's probably some differences among class and things like that, but no one's gonna be, getting a headline in the New York Times over targeting Starbucks spend. But targeting nursing home spend or medical expenses, that would be bad times, okay? Okay, here's another one. Investigate the demographic balance in your data after training the model, okay? So this is important. Let's say you've got a training set, and it's just by luck, it's 50% men, 50% women. Great, we have a balanced data set. Our model will not be biased. That is not true, okay? So after you train that model, and then you can still have a model that's trained, and then when it predicts something, it'll predict 85% men, 15% women, or vice versa. Or again, this can be proxies for any demographics, right? So balanced inputs do not guarantee balanced predictions. So definitely, when you're looking at creating a model, you want to have a balanced training set for sure. That certainly helps, but that's not enough. You have to look at what does it predict, and we'll see some examples later of where that kind of goes wrong. The other point about this that's important is sometimes you have not every business and certainly not every opportunity you have to even collect demographics, right? So a lot of times you're building models you don't even know. For example, in a credit card example, we don't know the breakdown of men, women on stuff like this. So it's important to collect this stuff so that you can test this on the back end, even if you're not going to use it as an input, okay? I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but let me get a little more specific. The stakes are different for employees and consumers, and certainly the stakes are different for every kind of consumer, or every kind of context of a person. But particularly for our business, we do a lot of work with employees, and so we have to be very careful about that. So here's some ground rules that we laid out. Roll all the scoring up to groups of at least 5 employees. So meaning, like I said, if we have that churn prediction that we do for an employee, we would never show that employer John Doe's churn prediction, okay? We would always roll it up to groups of at least 5 and say this group of 5 has a red churn prediction or a green, right? Or some proxy for risk. But we're never gonna go down to the individual, because what we don't want to happen, I mean, there's probably a million things people could do, but certainly what we don't want to happen is have that boss say, well, if your churn prediction's over 50%, just get out, right? We don't want that. Never append third-party data to the individual level, such as credit scores or social media activity, right? So these are things that you can do in the consumer side. So on the consumer side, if I was targeting, again, a credit card offer to somebody, it's often very impactful to have that person's credit score to know if this is someone I'm going to target with this credit card or not. That's okay on the consumer side. On the employee side, it's not. So we don't want to say, for example, this person's a better probability of being a good hire because they've got a good credit score, or this person's more likely to leave your business if they have a low credit score or anything between. And I'm just using credit scores as an example, but really any third-party data of scraping their social media or anything like that, it's okay on the consumer side, but the context is totally different on the employee side. You're potentially costing someone their job, or again, that person who maybe has a bad credit score, you're costing them an opportunity to get out of that. So we don't want any part of that. Treat every person-company combination as independent. So a big part of what we do is we have a lot of auto clients. So we do a lot of auto sales incentive programs, okay? So that means that John Doe worked at Honda, sold this many Accords, won this prize, whatever. They may or may not, in their next job, go to Nissan, okay? So in our data sets, we've never looked, honestly, but we probably have a lot of matches between name, address, email address, things like that. But we want to give, on the employee side especially, that person the same chance at Nissan they had at Honda. So I don't want them to go in to Nissan and say, well, we found you in our Honda database, and you were a good or maybe a bad salesperson there, so we're going to give you a different opportunity here. We're going to treat every person-company combination as independent, okay? Like we've never seen them before, even if we probably have seen them at one of their competitors, right? With me? Okay. Okay. A couple more here. So this is just a general guide, a guide rail that I'd give is that facial recognition is a real minefield. So this is not something that we do in our business. I understand that certain businesses need this. Good luck, honestly, because this is a total minefield. So, you may have seen something like this. So Amazon has a facial recognition tech that matches people to mugshots. And so there's some NFL players that, they ran this through and, made them matched into mugshots. That's bad times. I'll read this one for the folks in the back. Researchers use facial recognition tools to predict sexual orientation. LGBT groups aren't happy, right? Do not want any part of that. This is kind of creepy, right? Again, system one, you don't need me to tell you this is creepy to know this is creepy. So this is a technology that will project like a face on your face so that facial recognition will not be able to see it, right? Why would someone need something like that, right? If you're following the protests in Hong Kong, this is all about facial recognition stuff. So they're using lasers for cameras to try to blind them. They are taking down facial recognition poles, right? Talk about dystopian sci-fi novel stuff, right? Fighting to take down a facial recognition pole is pretty interesting. So, if this is part of your business and you need this to survive, put some guardrails of your own around this. I would say for any of us that it's not critical, this is a real minefield to get into right now. So, I wouldn't recommend it. Okay. Last one here. So think about the worst headline someone could write about your project. So, when you are undertaking a machine learning exercise where you're trying to do a model that's, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to predict, someone's preference for this or the likelihood someone's going to do that. You might be making it with all of the best intentions in the world. But if this goes awry, or again, you're using a variable maybe that you didn't intend to use, the person who writes the story about how this went wrong is not going to care about your intent, okay? So here's one. Racial bias in medical algorithm favors white patients over sicker black patients, right? The person who wrote this algorithm, I guarantee did not write it to have this effect. But when they didn't test the output, so again, going back a few slides to, predict what would happen. Is this favoring this group over that group? That's a pretty critical step because otherwise you're going to end up in the Washington Post with this headline. How Amazon accidentally invented a sexist hiring algorithm. YouTube under fire for allegedly targeting kids with ads, right? So when you're undergoing a project, think about the worst case scenario for how this could be interpreted. And I'm not suggesting any of these reporters have agendas. I'm saying that they will look at the implications where you're looking at, I have the intent to make this something good, and certainly you don't want to end up like this, right? Okay. I feel like this, has been kind of a downer talk, and I apologize for that. So I want to end. So I told you about System 1, System 2, and certainly Maritz, our whole business is around behavioral science and how to motivate people. So another principle of behavioral science is the peak-end theory. So how people remember what you do is an average of the peak and the end. Okay, so I want to end on something a little bit more uplifting than this, please. Okay. The level of data that people will share is directly proportional to the value you bring them, okay? So all the stuff I've talked about is very much about how to limit, guardrails. You can get like an open license to people to share incredibly sensitive data with you as long as the value is there for them. And I think there's a lot of examples, but I think the best example that's out there right now is with the Apple Watch. So here's a couple examples. Hiker says Apple Watch saved his life by calling 911 after he fell off a cliff. 30-year-old man training for first marathon says Apple Watch saved his life. So in the case of the first, this is impact detection that will automatically call 911. In the case of the second, it's actually the newest Apple Watch is an EKG that will measure your heart, and not just the rate of it, but actually the EKG. And so actually, I grabbed these. If you Google this, there's like hundreds of stories about people who have found undiagnosed health problems because of their Apple Watch or other smartwatches, right? So, again, going back to, imagine Facebook saying, give me your heart rate. that would seem incredibly, wrong, and that system one creepy would be like, what? Why do you need this? If you're going to use it to save my life or make my life better, I will give you whatever information you want to know. So again, think about the personalized medicine that Jamie was talking about earlier. In order for this to work, you're going to have to share a lot of data about your genome with that medical personnel in order to make that algorithm work for you. But if it's going to make me healthier, make my kids healthier, I'm happy to do so. So it's directly correlated with the value you bring. So hopefully that was a little bit more uplifting than kind of the downer stuff from everything else. But so that's what I've got. Thank you very much. Thank you. We do have some time for questions. Yes, thank you. We've got microphones. I don't bite. We've got one over here.
So Jesse, your last slide, you showed about creating value for that customer. How do you do that when sometimes they don't even understand that maybe this could be value to them? How do they know that, oh, the CKG might save my life at some point in time? And how do you educate people about that?
Great question. So, I mean, it's a big part of it's about marketing. I mean, I think just like we were talking about earlier with the food, right, and understanding that this food's better for you than that one. First step is knowing the truth, like knowing, and so in the case of food, it's, hey, this will make you healthier. In the case of something like the Apple Watch, it's, hey, we might be able to save your life with this, and then marketing that and having people understand that there's a value there. And certainly I think some companies could do, what I have not seen in any of Apple's marketing is that story. They talk about, that it's, waterproof and go swimming with it, but I think that maybe Apple and maybe some others undervalue the value of what they're providing. So they need to promote it. Yes, go ahead.
So I was wondering if you had any effort on putting these restriction into a restriction, package and put, as an input to your, machine learning. Have you done that? Is there anything out there that, maybe?
So there's nothing out there from what I know. Again, if you do find something, certainly like email me, because I think this, again, we're all trying to figure this out together. We do not do that in a sort of automated fashion. We do it through code review and really sitting down. And so I actually have a little bit of hesitation. I think there's sort of like, automation is great. If it helps me kind of make this code run faster, awesome. Like, I'm all game for that. But I also feel like that's where a lot of the problems might, especially something like this, and you say, well, hey, why is the New York Times knocking on our door saying that our algorithm targets minorities differently than whatever? And say, well, we ran it through the system. We ran it through the package we created. It shouldn't be able to do that. And it's like, well, wait a second. We need to really slow down instead of speeding up on this. And speed up on, training my, hyperparameters for my neural network. Yeah, speed that up. But slow down on what do we think someone's going to feel when they get this email from us that says you've been selected for this and this? What do we feel when that employee says, hey, you've been identified for additional training, blah, blah, blah? That's the thing we need to kind of slow down a little bit on.
One more quick question. Sure. So when you were separating people as client and employee, where do you put the hiring process? So you have prospect, employee. Would you put them into your
employee for sure?
Employee. Okay.
Employee for sure. So again, I mean, we want when someone comes in through one of our hiring algorithms, we want them to sink or swim on their own merit. So we do not want to, again, match them up with their previous performance at any other employer, and we don't want them to be any weighted higher or lower on their credit score or their activity on the website or anything like that. We want them to sink or swim in their own merits and not have, we're again, on a consumer, I would say, only target people who are likely to do this, right? I could, definitely, that because it's just a totally different ballgame for consumers than it is for employees.
Thank you.
Thanks. We got a couple over here.
Thanks. So you talked about how certain use cases like employees you take a greater responsibility in, what you can do with the data. How does that responsibility translate for your customers in relation to just Maritz? So for example, if you guys are doing these kind of guide rules, do you also feel like a shared responsibility to educate your customers on how to use the data as well?
Absolutely. So you mean customers in this case, meaning like our clients. So we work like with a bank, for example, and so we might be doing their credit card loyalty, but we might also be doing their employee stuff. Yeah, all this stuff is partnerships, and so what I will say is that we have to set the example, because as an agency that works across multiple clients, they look to us for guidance. What sense does it make, or I shouldn't say what sense, I would say, from a feasibility perspective, for every client to come up with their own code of ethics, which I hope they do, is going to be slower than for their agency to say, well, we believe this. We believe that employees should not be targeted one way or the other based on their credit score. Then our clients that work with us, they'll go, oh, that seems like a good idea. You know what? We're going to do that too. So we're going to set the example. And so I think it's a big part of the education. And certainly, again, I guess it goes without saying, but like, we're not going to compromise either. So if a client says, well, wait a second, you scored our employees based on the retention probability, give me those scores. I want to know John Doe's retention percentage. We're going to say no. And if they, then we say, great, go find someone else that will, but we're not going to do it. I think there was maybe one more.
So my question is kind of related to that, and you've sort of answered it, but my question was, when you're looking at sharing your own individual data or becoming part of a focus group, sometimes it seems the agreement that you need to read, which is 7,000 words long, a lot like your iPhone updates.
Right.
So is there a way to downsize that criteria into a way that's meaningful and lets me think, I absolutely want to be part of this, or if I have to read these things, I'm not going to do it?
It's a great point. I think companies need to do a better job of saying, here's what you will get if you agree to this. And I think that that's a whole talk in itself of how the terms and conditions of this stuff and how far off of center we've gotten from that of just clicking accept on things that we don't understand. But I think, like, for example, Facebook being a really popular example of one that, we all accepted the T's and C's to Facebook. None of us read it. And so then when they used our data in a certain way that we, didn't think is right, they're pointing back to the legality. So remember I had that slide that said legality is not enough. They're going back and say, wait, this was legal. I'm like, yeah, but legal is not enough. You have to, be a trusted partner with our data. And so I think there's just a higher bar that, the T's and C's will not cover.
That's a good bumper sticker. Legal is not enough.
Legal is not enough.
Well, thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Jesse, real quick, I just had a question.
Sure.
I think these guardrails are incredibly helpful and actionable. In your experience, how critical has it been for organizations to have the right goals and success criteria? And what I mean by that is you gave the example of churn. Oftentimes, churn isn't actually the goal.
Right.
So can you maybe share some of your experience that relates to when putting these guardrails into practice, what critical role, if any at all, does goals and success criteria play in driving those guardrails?
I think it's pretty critical. I think it gets back to, that really becomes the heart of what you're trying to do. So I'll use a baseball example for you. So, when you're trying to predict the performance of a baseball player, so that might be, that's the goal when you're looking at baseball models. And so the things you might use for that, if I'm predicting if this prospect is going to be Mike Trout or if this prospect is going to, not make the major leagues, I'm going to throw every variable I know into that model. And I'm going to put in whether they wear contact lenses or had LASIK, or if they're left-handed, or if they're I'm going to put everything I can in there. And again, because that's a context of this is about performance on the field, and versus something like a credit card offer and it's a churn rate or likelihood to take this offer. The stakes are just pretty low, honestly, right? It's great to get a credit card that you enjoy, but the stakes are really low. So for that context, I'm not going to put in every variable I know about you, because it's not worth it. And again, it's not worth it, but also and let me be clear too. I feel like I say stuff and then I realize how it's going to be interpreted. In the baseball context, there's certainly ethics around that too, right? You're not going to put in variables that you wouldn't, again, want to come out and look negative. But what I mean is, I'm going to scrape the bottom of the barrel on that case. And in the consumer version, where I'm trying to figure out if someone's going to like their credit card offer or not, if the variable that, like the 300th variable is like on the fence, I'm going to take it out, because the 300th variable means that, like, it's so small in the predictability, versus finding the next Mike Trout is worth hundreds of millions to a baseball team.
Jesse, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. And what's interesting about that insight is really whether the consequence is large or small, our ethics should remain the same. So that was outstanding. All right, we're going to move on to our second speaker, and we're really excited to have Bonnie Helleb here.